In early June 1940, there was quite a lot going on in Europe. The successful German invasion of the Low Countries and France, not to mention the Allied evacuation at Dunkirk. Previously in the spring, the Germans had invaded Denmark and Norway with varying degrees of success. A very difficult battle emerged with the Battle of Narvik and the various campaigns in the sea, air, and land. The initial capture of the Norwegian port city was hotly contested by an Allied counter-invasion that was eventually successful on the 27th of May. Because of the other events I previously mentioned, 10 days later, they were forced to evacuate, necessitating fleet carriers like HMS Ark Royal or Glorious to assist in the evacuation, with Glorious ferrying aircraft stationed in Norway back to the United Kingdom. Given this information and the fact that German High Command, and particularly German Naval High Command, were sensitive to the events in Northern Norway, they launched on June 4th, under the command of Vice Admiral Wilhelm Marschall, Operation Juno, a sortie of the battleship Scharnhorst, his flagship Gneisenau, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, and several destroyers. The remaining surface units of the Kriegsmarine were either sunk, still working up after damage in the spring, or being constructed. They were going to help relieve the pressure on German land forces operating in northern Norway. In the process, the operation found limited success in the original outlines, in finding the Allied convoys returning to the United Kingdom. But on June 8th, the battleship Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, while on their own, found the aircraft carrier Glorious and her two escorting destroyers Ardent and Acosta, sinking all three. The planning for Operation Juno began in mid-May as the Admiral Hipper, Scharnhorst, and other ships, including the Gneisenau, eventually had their shakedown cruises in the Baltic, and Admiral Erich Raeder, Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine, informed Hitler that those three ships would all be ready for a sortie by early June. The initial plan was to send them to the northern North Sea and Arctic Ocean to relieve German land operations in northern Norway and to defend the southern Skagerrak and southern Norway by threatening communications between Britain and Norway. There was some thought in using submarines, but Raeder and other planners were strongly advised against it. Turning to German Northern Theater operations 1940 to 1945 by Earl Zemke, on May 24th, with the situation at Narvik deteriorating rapidly, the naval staff dropped its plans for harassing the Allies' supply lines and began to consider means of bringing direct relief to the force at Narvik. It concluded that the situation at sea was favorable and that a sortie into Vestfjord as far as Narvik, or into Vagsfjord or as far as Harstad, was entirely feasible. On the following day, it ordered Naval Group West, Marina Gruppenkommando West, to plan an operation along those lines and time it as early as possible, sometime after June 2nd. Group 21 would designate promising shore targets. On the 27th, Hitler added the mission of opening and protecting a coastal supply line for the 2nd Mountain Division in the Trondheim area. The orders for the operation, to be carried out under the codename Juno by the battleship Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, and 4 destroyers, were issued on May 29th. Zemke continues, the first and main assignment was a surprise penetration into Vestfjord and Vagsfjord to Horstadt and destruction of the bases, transports, and warships found there. If reconnaissance reports showed that a sortie into Vestfjord and onto Oftfjord, possibly as far as Narvik, appeared to offer better prospects of success, that was to be carried out as the main assignment. The additional task, protection of supply transports from Trondheim to Bodo, could be carried out either simultaneously with the main assignment or after its execution. Trondheim was to be used as a base. The naval staff indicated that it was thinking not only of a single strike against a specific target, but also of continuing operations that would be carried out over a longer period of time. The order, as delivered to the commanding Admiral Fleet, Wilhelm Marschall, set specific missions. Still, in a verbal discussion with Marschall on May 31st, Raeder couched the requirements in more general terms, which may have caused a serious divergence in views regarding the execution of the operation, which later developed between the commanding Admiral Fleet and the naval staff. At 8 a.m. on June 4th, the warships made their way out of Kiel. 4 supply ships had been dispatched under minesweeper escort to Trondheim, and 2 tankers from which the warships, especially the destroyers and the Admiral Hipper, so they could refuel at sea, were on their way to rendezvous points in northern Norwegian waters. On June 3rd, based off observations, the naval staff surmised that the Allies were building strength in Narvik due to the heavy amounts of traffic in the area to gain a victory to counterbalance the ongoing defeats in the west, And on the 6th, they assumed the Allies had 2 battleships, 1 aircraft carrier, 4 cruisers, and 15 destroyers in the area, when in reality, the evacuation force consisted of 2 aircraft carriers, 3 cruisers, and 10 destroyers for the Allies. With any lack of clarification on further reports, Vice Admiral Marschall decided on the 6th, while at sea, to time his attack on Harstad for the night of the 8th through the morning of the 9th. On the evening of the 6th, the warships met a tanker at a position halfway between Norway and Iceland and began refueling operations for the next 24 hours. Once the refueling was complete on the night of the 7th, Marschall assembled his commanders aboard his flagship, the battleship Gneisenau, where they had some decisions to make, and we turn to the war diary of the battleship as found in battleships of the Scharnhorst class, the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the backbone of the German surface forces at the outbreak of the war by Gerhard Koop and Klaus-Peter Schmolke. Conference fleet commander and commanders on flagship Gneisenau. For an attack on Harstad and Vagsfjord, we still had no information in the mine/net barriers, underwater obstructions, and shore torpedo and gun batteries. And that was not the only precondition for initiating the attack. The second precondition was satisfactory information based on air reconnaissance as to the types, extent, and the situation of enemy naval forces in the fjord. Both preconditions had to be met to not run the risk of incurring the most serious losses. The destruction of loading wharves and land installations seems to me very questionable. Where are they? We will still be able to recognize them from the ship, and we can get at them. Finally, an attack of this kind ought to be mounted jointly with the Luftwaffe, and for this, we require liaison and cooperation. It would appear from current reports that all ship movements at the present time are westwards. Could this signify an evacuation? According to the subsequent situation report supplied by Admiral Norway on June 8, 1940, there were, in fact, no naval forces in the fjord. We might therefore still be making a stab in the dark. Fleet therefore proposed to attack the nearest escorted convoy within range. That was very much preferable to an unprepared blind thrust, which would have deprived us of the element of surprise in the event of the latter raid on Harstad. Essentially, Marschall and his commanders deduced that the British were evacuating Narvik, and decided that the convoys offered valuable targets, something that the naval staff, upon hearing at 5 a.m. on the 8th, did not necessarily agree with. Telling Marschall his main assignment was still Harstad, an attack by Hipper and the destroyers on the convoys was left to his discretion. Marschall still went through with his plans of attacking the convoys, and soon would find success. At 6 a.m. on the 8th, the warships encountered the oil tanker Pioneer and the trawler Juniper, and had sunk both before they could transmit radio signals. Throughout the morning, the ships continued to search for the convoys, with some of the ships launching reconnaissance planes to find said convoys. The reports coming in about a cruiser and a merchant ship to the south, and an armed merchant ship and a hospital ship to the north. The Hipper set course to intercept the merchant ship, which proved to be the transport Orama that carried only 100 German prisoners and was sunk with her signals being successfully jammed. And the hospital ship Atlantis was not attacked. Shortly after 1 p.m., Marschall released the destroyers and Hipper to Trondheim for refueling and take over the task of opening a route for supplies along the coast. Marschall took the 2 battleships to the Harstad and Tromsø area, where radio intercepts detected the presence of 2 aircraft carriers. When before 5 p.m., the mastheads of a warship were sighted, which upon closer inspection turned out to be the aircraft carrier Glorious and her 2 escorting destroyers, Ardent and Acosta. Turning to the Allies' side, the British had dispatched Glorious as well as the carrier Ark Royal on May 31st as part of a force that was to assist in the evacuation of Norway in and around Narvik. In all, Operation Alphabet could be considered a success with the evacuation of 25,000 Allied troops. Although it is often overlooked as Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of France from Dunkirk was going on at the same time. Ark Royal and Glorious played 2 very different roles in this operation. Ark Royal was to carry out bombing missions ashore and to provide fighter cover for the troop ships, while Glorious only carried enough aircraft for her protection. She was there to re-embark RAF aircraft and return them home to the United Kingdom as a shuttle of sorts. The 2 carriers were off the Norwegian coast by the 2nd of June and started their various missions. It was hoped that Glorious would be able to fly on the RAF Gladiators based out of Bardufoss Air Base. The Gladiators were able to land, Not only that, there were still hurricanes in Norway. These too were flown onto Glorious, with only a minimal amount of damage being an impressive feat, as both these types of RAF fighters were not designed to land on carriers. This was completed by the 7th. The next morning, Glorious was zigzagging at 17 knots, with a portion of her boilers not connected, on her way back to the United Kingdom. The two ships accompanying her, Acosta and Ardent, were on either side of her bow as an anti-submarine screen. With that, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau steamed south in the hopes of catching any target, and at 4:45 p.m., the lookout on Scharnhorst Siegfried Goss spotted smoke on the horizon at a range of 28 miles. The two German ships pursued the smoke and soon identified the targets as an aircraft carrier with almost no screen to guard her. On the British end, two strange ships were spotted at 5 p.m. After not replying to a challenge from Glorious, the destroyer Ardent was sent to investigate the two ships and was fired upon by the secondary batteries of the Germans. Glorious desperately tried to flee, but she was no match for the speed of the two German battleships, as all of their boilers were connected. Soon, Glorious was in range of the 9-11-inch guns of the Scharnhorst, and at a range of around 16 miles, the Scharnhorst scored the first of many hits on Glorious. And soon after, Gneisenau entered the fray and fired on Glorious. A sailor on Glorious said about the first salvos, "Almost as soon as I reached my station, I heard the scream of the first salvo from the enemy passing over the ship, followed by the roar of explosions just behind us. The very next came inboard, and although it is hard to remember very clearly what happened from now on, I know the hangar I was in was soon aflame, and the aircraft stowed there were wrecked and afire. Everything was utter chaos, and I felt the hangar was not the place for me, so I returned to the port gallery deck for a short while. This was a prudent retreat. Fed by the streams of petrol from the shattered aircraft, the fire in the hangar was almost out of control. The hangar had to be evacuated, the fire curtains lowered, and the hangar sprayed, which temporarily quenched the flames. When the two German ships were sighted and did not respond to Glorious's challenge at 5 p.m., Captain Doyley Hughes, the captain of Glorious, turned away first to the south and then to the southeast to try to get planes into the air. And on board Glorious, there were frantic attempts to get the Swordfish armed and away, but due to the continuous accurate fire from the German guns, it made it extremely difficult to do so, and compounding things early on, Glorious would be hit in the forward part of the upper hangar, destroying the RAF Hurricanes there, causing a massive fire and preventing access to the aircraft torpedoes. Meanwhile, Ardent, the northernmost destroyer, commanded by Lieutenant Commander J.F. Barker, after going to challenge the oncoming German ships, and upon being fired at, she began laying a protective smoke screen. She charged the German battleships at full speed, firing her forward two 4.7-inch guns. Scharnhorst battled the destroyer with her secondary batteries, with Gneisenau firing at the destroyer occasionally. Attempting to dodge the German shells, Ardent zigzagged, but it was to no avail, and she was hit in the number 1 boiler room. She continued to be hit as she got into position to fire her torpedoes. Her torpedoes, although close to Scharnhorst, did not affect the German battleships, as they continued to plow on. Ardent continued to take a pounding to delay the German ships, and would capsize and sink at 5:28. Acosta, commanded by Charles Glassford, the southernmost destroyer, did much of the same, laying a smokescreen and bursting in and out of it at full speed, firing her guns, still being on the starboard quarter of Glorious. She went in for a torpedo attack. Now, to quote Captain Charles Glassford, this coming from Carrier Glorious, The Life and Death of an Aircraft Carrier by John Winton, Glassford said, "You may think we are running away from the enemy. We are not. Our chummy ship, Ardent, has sunk. The Glorious is sinking. The least we can do is make a show. Good luck to you all." Now to quote leading seaman C.G. Nick Carter, whose action station on Acosta was in charge of the after torpedo tubes. We then altered course into our smokescreen. I had the order to stand by to fire tubes 6 and 7. We then came out of the smokescreen, altered course to starboard, firing our torpedoes from the port side. It was then I had my first glimpse of the enemy. To be honest, it appeared to me to be one large ship, and one small one. And we were very close. I fired my 2 torpedoes from my tubes, aft. The foremost tubes fired theirs. We were there watching the results. I'll never forget that cheer that went up. On the port bow of one of the ships, a yellow flash and a great column of smoke and water shot up from her. We knew we had hit it. I could not see how we could have missed, so close as we were. The ship that the Acosta had hit was the Scharnhorst, and according to her war diary, this hit occurred at 6:39 p.m., causing damage and flooding to the ship, which put Sea Turret out of action and a temporary drop in speed. After firing her torpedoes, Acosta slipped back into her smokescreen, and as soon as she poked out of her smokescreen again, the German ships were ready. She was hit hard, with a shell hitting the engine room and killing the crew of Carter's tube. Even though she was hit, Acosta's guns kept firing on defiantly. Soon, that ceased, as she was hit several more times. A large explosion seemed to lift the ship out of the water, and that was her end. The last time the captain, Charles Glassford, was seen, he had taken a cigarette from the case and lit it, telling the men of Carter's raft, "Goodbye and good luck." By that time in the battle, Glorious had gone down a little while earlier. On the German side, an account of the bravery of the little destroyers was recorded from memory on the 19th of July, 1945, by Vice Admiral Schubert, being the executive officer on Scharnhorst during the battle. He finishes off his account by saying, "Not only the tactical handling, but the audacity and pluck of the destroyers were outstanding. Every officer taking part in the action agreed. The destroyers put their utmost into the task, although in their hopeless position, success was impossible from the start." We last left Glorious as she was hit in the upper hangar, and at 5 p.m., Glorious was hit in her bridge. Royal Marine Ronald Hellis describes the hit on the bridge. "Like a distant thunder, culminating in a sudden wall of vicious sound, leaving the whole gun platform shuddering with the impact. Merciful God, they'd got their range right. I looked up the cliff face of the wall of steel forward of the bridge and saw the steel shattering. Plumes of smoke filled the air as I watched in horror. They'd hit the bridge. At the impact, I threw myself on the platform instinctively. The shell appeared to be a direct hit on the island and had killed almost everybody in the bridge and the adjacent compartments. Almost certainly, Captain Doyley Hughes was killed instantly in the blast. During this time and prior, Glorious had been transmitting signals before the bridge was destroyed in an attempt to contact other forces in the area. By that point in the battle, Glorious, although badly burning, was able to maintain speed, and there was a chance that she could flee from the scene. This was not to be. With a hit in the area of the boiler rooms causing a fire, steam pressure in the boilers dropped, and the speed of the carrier faltered. Stoker James O'Neill wrote, "On the way there, I could see it was a losing fight, because Jerry was hitting hard and heavy, and we could not get close enough with the 4.7-inch guns to return fire. After getting to the mess deck, I wondered if I would ever make my way back again. It seemed hours getting back, but it must have only been a matter of minutes. Orders came through for us to go put out a fire on P4 gun. When we got to it, all about the place were dead bodies. Some played hoses on the flames, others had to throw ammunition overboard. The hoses were washing the remains of some of our shipmates off the bulkheads. Having managed the fire, we were ordered to go below again. Some of the young lads were wondering when their turn would come. Then a fire started in the intake to sea boiler room, and the boilers had to be shut down. By 5:10, Glorious was being hit almost constantly, and to take from Hellas once more, and the whole side of the Glorious seemed to cave in, leaving a choking cloud of smoke and a thunderous roar that echoed away into the darkening sky. The sea, so calm before the action, was now churned up and feckled with an ugly gray. God, I thought, we've nearly had our chips. Stupefied, we waited, and I wish we had. That's when I saw Ginger McCall. He was walking over from his post with P5, walking, holding the crazily twisted rail of the ship and laughing at me. Then I saw why he was walking oddly. His uniform was ragged, what was left of it. Just a torn shirt and a part of his trousers. One leg was shot off, and there was splintered bone and dripping red and black blood, and white strings of sinews. My throat was full of spittle, and I could just vomit to look at him. Not too long after, the order to abandon ship was given, and Glorious slipped beneath the waves at 6:10 p.m. The loss of life was large, with 1,519 Royal Navy and Royal Air Force personnel perishing. For the survivors, the ordeal would continue for some time. As the abandoned ship order came, men jumped into the oil and debris-strewn water, and Hellas recalled, "Some were almost non-swimmers, and the shock of the deep dive had been fatal. They knew they were jumping to their certain death, poor devils, but they jumped unflinchingly because they got the order to abandon ship. Now the ship had abandoned them, and they were dead, gripped in their lifebelts, bobbing like a mute chorus of flotsam. Men drifted about, trying to find something to cling on to, finding Carly floats to grab onto or climb into. To keep their spirits up, they sang songs or hymns. In the cold Norwegian water, staying alive, even in the rafts and boats, was difficult. Many of the 900 men who abandoned the ship succumbed to the icy water. Stoker James O'Neill recalls, "It wasn't long before the first man died. I felt a terrible feeling come over me to watch a man die like that at first. The second man was my mate, Stoker Bartlett, one of the finest lads I knew. It was a sad end to such a man as him. The Padre said a few prayers and told the man nearest to put him over the side. After these two, it was one man after the other going to their maker. A few looked at me when they were on their last, with a look in their eyes asking me to help them. But they were past help, and it was that cold. I couldn't move if I could have helped them. It was a terrible thing, the look they gave me at times. It haunts me. I wish I could forget it." After the battle, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau steered away, with Vincent P. O'Hara in the German fleet at war 1939 to 1945 writing about the action. Scharnhorst was the most heavily engaged during the action, expending 212 11-inch shells and 69 salvos, 842 rounds of 5.9-inch and 136 of 4.1-inch. Gneisenau was more conservative, expending 175 rounds of 11-inch and 306 of 5.9-inch. Although many men were alive when the ship sank, it was several days before any rescue ships found them. Only 45 survivors aboard the open floats and rafts in the frigid seas. With that being said, Admiral Marschall broke off the operation as the damage to Scharnhorst was in fact quite serious, as their speed was reduced to 20 knots and they intended to steer for home. But Naval Group West ordered him to go to Trondheim instead, where the ships arrived on the 9th. The journey from the open seas to Trondheim was fraught with danger, with sightings of British bombers, supposed submarines, and other such dangers. The first action reports started to come in about the operation before their arrival. The naval staff seemed pleased initially, even sending the recently repaired cruiser Nürnberg to join the force for further operations. But on the 9th, Marschall's conduct started to come into question and subject to criticism, with the naval staff still unaware of the Allied evacuation of Norway between the 8th and the 9th, maintaining that the admiral should have still bombarded the Norwegian coast, and the encounter with Glorious was a piece of luck. That afternoon, Marschall was ordered to put to sea with Gneisenau alone if need be to continue the operation. The following morning, he put to sea with Gneisenau, the Admiral Hipper, and the destroyers. Nothing of note happened that day, and they went on to Trondheim per the orders from Naval Group West. The coming days would see the naval staff urge aggressive action, with Marschall wanting to conserve his force. Finally, Marschall requested that he be relieved of his command on the grounds of illness. This delayed things until the 20th, when Vice Admiral Gunter Lütjens arrived to take command, sailing with the Gneisenau, Hipper, and one destroyer for more operations in the North Sea. Less than 12 hours later, the Gneisenau received a torpedo hit by a British submarine, where Koop and Schmolke write this: "The hole in the bow was large enough to allow a 100-man picket boat to sail through the Gneisenau from one side to the other. After the ship had docked at Trondheim, makeshift repairs were carried out, and the external damage screened over. Neither the Scharnhorst nor Gneisenau were now battle-worthy. Under the prevailing conditions, and with the material available, a restoration to full readiness was not possible, and repairs in a German yard were indicated. This put an end to the prospects of further operations in the Arctic and or North Sea, because neither the Scharnhorst nor Gneisenau were battle-worthy anymore. Granted, that still left the Admiral Hipper, which would see her venture out later in the year. Nevertheless, the German battleships returned to Germany later on in the summer, which is a bit outside of the scope of the video. Although I will say both came under attack from the British in the return journey home, with Gneisenau being attacked by a submarine and Scharnhorst being attacked by British torpedo bombers. Another thing outside the scope of this video is the controversy surrounding the sinking of Glorious. I've done a video on the sinking before, but I did not go into the controversies there as well. However, I will post a link to a video that delves into it a bit more in the description. Make of the operation what you will, because I don't feel qualified enough to discuss its level of success. Although, the operation is a bit more interesting to write and hopefully watch than the typical ship videos. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great day.